So thank you very much for the introduction. That sounded way longer than when I was writing it out. It seemed short, but before jumping in, I want to just really acknowledge a whole lot of people have put a whole lot of time into the stuff I'm going to present here. You know, we've had tons of support from the agriculture and irrigation team. Transportation does a ton of work on this, and as well as other ministries in the department, irrigation districts, local governments, and other partners that we partner with. So a lot of the stuff I'm presenting here is on behalf of a huge audience of people that have, really put an incredible amount of time in after 2013 to recover and rebuild. So I definitely am not taking credit for very much of this work that we're presenting. I guess Tim left, but Tim and I were chatting just before the break, and I think everyone has that moment, or everyone that was in southern Alberta for the floods has that moment where they realized something big was happening. For me, I was at a gas station in Fort Nelson. For Tim, he was sitting camping and got, all of a sudden your phone is going crazy with, updates and texts and stuff like that. But one of the moments that stuck with me was a very tired head Nenshi on June 23rd standing up in front of the media after some canoers were going down the Beau River when it was at peak flow and pleading with people to stay off the rivers. It's dangerous. The fire departments are fully allocated and tasked right now. Like, the last thing they need to do is pulling someone going for a recreational boat ride. So, and all that really started on the 19th. When a big low pressure system wrapped up into Alberta, pushed up against the Rockies and just started dumping an immense amount of rain. So over the course of 3 days, we had 200 millimeters of widespread rain and up to over 300 millimeters in the Highwood Basin. And that really drove, what happened next. So just taking a little glimpse across the province. So this is down in the Crow's Nest Falls. Everyone's been there on a nice summer day. It's a nice, relaxing pool to be sitting in on a hot day and cooling off. It was not that at that point. So when we moved up to Canmore, this is Cougar Creek on a normal summer day. If you find water in Cougar Creek on a late August day, you're doing pretty good. It's a very dry creek. But in 2013, it was a raging torrent of sediment, trees, rocks, boulders coming down. The only reason things turned out so well as they did, because there was contractors in town with excavators, and they were able to park them at the bridge and start pulling gravel out of the bridge and kept water going down the main channel. If that bridge is plugged up, it would have pushed left into the houses, and the destruction would have been significantly worse. High River, was a particularly hard-hit community. There was a lot of the really, graphic photos coming there. Areas of the community that weren't even near the river were flooded, where water backed into low spots and then stayed there. And incredible pumping efforts were required to get that water out before they could even get people in and start assessing homes and things like that. But High River also did put out some of the most iconic pictures with the firefighter and the grandma was always a pretty classic. But downtown High River, including the City Hall, all their municipal records in the basement, all that was lost during the flood. And a lot of heavy equipment, combines were used to get people out, boats. So it was, the rescue effort in High River of getting everyone out was again pretty instrumental and pretty massive. And that's not even getting into the recovery. That was just getting people safe that first few days. In Calgary, the Beau River peaked at 8 times its normal flow rate, and the flows into Glenmore were 12 times what they would be that time of year. So again, just a massive amount of water coming in. You can see, water in the community of Sunnyside as well as in downtown, and we'll look at some of the, what's happened since then in those areas. But again, Calgary was heavily hit. There was 16 LRT stations closed, 20 bridges were closed, 30 parks were closed, and 34,000 locations lost power. So it was a massive amount of effort, of damage and destruction. And I think there were some of the iconic photos of the Stampede grounds being underwater, water in the Saddle Dome, all those places that are pretty iconic, and you just can't imagine floodwaters getting in there. I would be remiss if I missed out. There was one animal that was particularly okay with the floods, Lobe the hippo. Lobe the hippo, normal environment turned into the aquatic environment, so that has public safety concerns, but for Lobe, I think life was pretty good for a few days in the zoo by herself. So all in all, the 2013 floods, these are kind of the numbers by it. It was the first provincial state of emergency and totaled $5 billion worth of damages, and there were 4 deaths as a result of it. But since 2013, the province has taken many steps to reduce future flood exposure, and again, with all the partnerships with all the different organizations looking at that. So with that, I'm kind of going to jump into some of the things that have happened in the last 10 years. So one of the big kind of flagship projects that's on the way right now is the Beau River Reservoir Options. So that's looking at the opportunity to put a reservoir on the Beau River upstream of Calgary to provide flood and drought protection. So under the Beau River Reservoir Options Initiative, it's a kind of an umbrella project. And the main thrust of it is kind of taking a phased approach, looking at the engineering, the environmental, the social, economic, and the regulatory steps required to build a dam. That's not under the assumption that one will be built for 100% sure. It's working through those steps to make sure it's something that makes sense, that it's cost effective, and that it would deliver the level of protection that the city of Calgary as well as downstream users would need, and augment flow potentially for drought conditions. Under the BRO initiative umbrella, there's also the Beau River Alternative Mitigations Project, or conceptual assessment. And so one of the questions, if you go towards the regulatory side, will be, have you looked at the alternatives? What are the other ways you could meet the same objectives without building a big dam? And that's what this project is going to do. So it's going to look back and see all the pieces of flood mitigation that have been built, pool those together, and then look at other ways of developing that with different projects that aren't a reservoir. So from a timeline perspective, we had the 2013 floods. One of the first big watermark moments was the Beau River Working Group, the 2017 report. And so they identified 3 sections of the Beau River where a reservoir might be feasible and had different options within each of those segments. The Beau River Phase 1 conceptual assessment took those options. So they looked at each section individually and picked the highest scoring or the best value or best bang for your buck dam in each section. We're now working on the Phase 2, which is the feasibility study. So that's looking at, of those 3 options, starting to compare them and finding one that returns the best investment, has the best chance of moving through the regulatory process successfully, and will kind of provide Albertans with the protection they need. And nestled in there is the BRAM project, which will carry on. I think there's 2 really key features to point out. Is there's government decisions required to keep moving forward. So these reports, very similar to Al was saying, like we're providing recommendations and options, but the government is going to have to decide whether it moves to Phase 3, which would be the detailed engineering and working through the regulatory approvals, and then another government decision to move forward into the construction and development and commissioning of the dam. If we take just a quick look at another, so it's really been kind of a funnel type approach where we're starting with a big bucket of options, and it's just, working them down and down and down and getting into more detail as we go down, and then using that to drive decision making. So we're trying, looking at cost benefit, looking at the engineering feasibility of each of the sites, so geotechnical assessments, looking at the social side, the risk reduction, all of that. So we're in where the arrow is at Phase 2 still, so there is still 2 more phases to go. And I included this for this slide just because this project is in kind of that foundational stage where stakeholder engagement and people's input is really valuable for the project, and understanding the benefits that it would have and what it means for people living across Alberta for sure. So Google's your friend if you're looking for it, but if you find the project page, you can sign up for newsletter updates. There's regular project updates put out. And if you do have feedback, there's mechanisms to provide it through the website anytime, as well as targeted engagement as we move forward. So that's a big one. Kind of jumping into a bit more of the structural protection. So there's been a ton of work. So this is a very small subset. The first one I wanted to touch on quickly was Springbank 1, or Springbank Dam. So this is on the Elbow River upstream of Calgary. It's an off-stream storage, so in a higher flows, there would be a diversion activated that would push water into the reservoir for storage, where it would hold it to reduce the flood peak, and then put it back into the river when conditions are lower, and basically reducing the flood peak. So construction started last year on that project, and it's 2 years to get to the point of being partially operational and 3 years to fully operational. So work is well underway, and it's been kind of, that's a 9-year project from 2013, working through all the same design elements that the BRO is talking about, going through the regulatory piece, the stakeholder engagement, working through land access and all that, and now into the construction phase. So there's a 4-kilometer canal being built to feed into the reservoir, and then a 3.5-kilometer dam to hold that water back during a flood. So that's, again, it's a big project going on right in our back door. There was also, a lot of Alberta's infrastructure. I think it's a challenge to maintain all of that infrastructure and keep it funded. And 2013 was a good kind of kick in the pants, or a good opportunity to leverage that. So there was a lot of work done on some of the irrigation projects. So the Taylor Wasteway was built in 1953, and it was a wood spillway. to drop water down. It obviously performed its duties. In 2002, there was the big flood in southern Alberta, and you can see water going across the edge of the canal in the front of the truck there. So I'm sure that was, that was probably not a most comfortable moment if you're observing that. That's, yeah, a high-risk situation for sure. But basically, the wasteway is there to spill extra water during a flood so that the canal integrity remains intact. In 2017, the infrastructure operations team took a big project to revitalize that and rebuild that. So they've increased the capacity. They added a building on top, so you're not out. So all the electronics and all the, the equipment to move gates up and down is all housed inside and protected now. So there's and remote monitoring, so things can be activated remotely. Bullhorn Wasteway was the same. So this is again a critical piece for protecting canals during large floods. This wooden structure was again built in the 50s, and it just time and wood takes time, and it just needs to be rebuilt. So that again, undertaking that project and providing, modern equipment with remote capabilities with electric instead of hand cranked and hand operated equipment is I'm sure a nice team. I know a lot of the team is here, and I'm sure that's a nice thing not to have to be out there cranking in the rain in the middle of a high water event. So in addition to structural mitigation that the province put forward, there was a lot of structural mitigation that was done by local governments at irrigation districts. And so we had two major programs that one is still running and one is kind of sunsetting on the way out. So the Alberta Community Resilience Program and the Watershed Resilience and Restoration Program both had the same goal of improving flood and drought protection. But they took slightly different tacks. So the ACRP, or the Alberta Community Resilience Program, was approaching it as protecting critical infrastructure and improving public safety. So that was a bit their focus. The WRP program was a bit more on natural ecosystem health, so improving riparian areas, ecosystem function and integration, and that side of it. So what that looks like on the ground. So these are a couple photos from WRP. So off-stream watering for cattle, and building community knowledge. So a lot of just building up the knowledge and providing opportunities to keep cattle out of riparian areas and fencing them off for riparian health. Up north, they built some livestock crossings, again, to avoid those, fords where the cattle are walking through and disturbing the riparian area. So just, again, protecting those areas so that they can function, provide water quality, store more water, and improve overall ecosystem function. A kind of a neat project in Calgary that took a unique approach is the downtown Calgary flood barrier. So this is that water that was in downtown on the Calgary map. This is trying to keep that out of downtown Calgary. So there was quite an extensive flood protection barrier that was completed over the last few years. The first section was done in 2018. In 2022, it was largely built, and they're just doing the final touches on it this year to bring it up to the 1 in 200 year level. What it looks like when you're on the ground is quite a nice promenade. There's lots of opportunities to walk and cycle. There's benches for seating, but the neat part of the benches is they hold flood protection panels underneath. And so if there's a forecast for a high flow on the Bow River and it's looking like it'll get into the level that it could impact downtown Calgary, the city will send out crews. They'll install these panels in the gaps between the benches, and that creates a watertight barrier that is a few meters higher than the ground level, so it provides great access and pedestrian mobility, most of the year, but if there is that event that we need a little more flood protection, there's an opportunity to install that quite quickly. Within our group, flood mapping was something that the province has been doing since the 80s, and it was chugging along at a nice steady pace, but 2013 really highlighted the value of flood mapping. The first big kind of modern flood mapping study was completed in 2011 and 2012 in the city of Calgary, where we created more map layers and more inundation scenarios, and that was really used in the emergency response. So the city of Calgary was able to use those maps to pick out evacuation areas. They knew where their berms were that could potentially be overtopped, and they could make sure they positioned people or sandbags and things there to really protect the communities. So flood mapping has come a long way. With flood mapping, the Cougar Creek isn't your typical just riverine flood where we call it clear water flooding, but it's obviously not very clear in the middle of a flood, but it doesn't have that high sediment loads. So alluvial fans are feature in the Rocky Mountains where we have higher topography. They're characterized by really steep channels with lots of sediment. And so after 2013, the province undertook a project to identify all the alluvial fans that intersected people and transportation infrastructure. And then that's like a screening level assessment to start moving into risk assessment. So Canmore, the town of Canmore has taken this a really long way with really detailed risk assessments and mitigation projects like the Cougar Creek Dry Dam. And the province is continually working through the screening level and supporting municipalities and other jurisdictions that maybe aren't as aware that these hazards do exist. So the map on the red is all the alluvial fans spilling into Calgary. I touched on the riverine flood hazard mapping a little bit more. So this is, again, is the town of Canmore, but this is the Bow River in the bottom of the valley. So the flood mapping program has done huge strides. They've mapped 1,600 kilometers in the since 2013, but that's more than we've mapped in the 30 years before that. So it's a huge amount, and it's really detailed mapping that's there to support land use planning, to support emergency response. So it has hydraulic models, hydrology assessments that are all available for people to use for their local projects, whether that's like a diversion or a new flood mitigation action. So there's a slew of new maps that have been completed in the last year, and I think they'll be expected to go out in 2023 post-election. So we're excited to get those out again, because again, it's a public safety tool that everyone should have access to. And I should add, there's a floods.alberta.ca if you haven't been there, so that's where all of our flood mapping is housed on. So if you need to go there, that's the one-stop shop for provincial flood mapping. And then last but not least is the River Forecast Center. So the River Forecast Center, I think we had two things that we really accelerated or moved forward after 2013. And the first one was our website. We provide a public safety service, and if we can't get that information out, we can have the best numbers in our desk on an Excel sheet, but if that's not in the people that's hands that need it, that we're not helping anyone. So our old website, which is the one on the left, which is a lot of text and drop-down boxes and kind of clunky to use, got replaced with the rivers.alberta.ca, as well as our mobile app. And the mobile app came first, and it's kind of a cool thing. So we can do push notifications. So if we have flood warnings or watches, we'll send out push notifications across the province so everyone gets alerted. And it has the same functionality as a website now. So a map where you can zoom in, you can see pins, you can see snowpack, and all the stuff that was mentioned in my introduction is all housed on there. The second area where we've done a lot of improvement is in our forecasting capabilities. So we've developed the Alberta River Forecast System, which is a FUSE system, which is a flood early warning system. But we used to have our weather models in one spot, our river forecasting models in one spot, and our data outputs in one spot. And this platform brings everything together so we can view it through in one continuous work cycle. So it saved about 30% off our time to produce a forecast. So on our left, you can see there's precipitation coming in, so we know how much is coming in and how intense it'll be. And then on the right, we're modeling stream flow hydrographs and comparing those to what we're observing, and then providing that information out again so people can use that. We also have built all of our daily natural flows and those types of tools in there that I know support irrigation and that side of things as well. And so, that's kind of where we stand right now after 10 years. And I wanted to close with this, and I think there's two important elements to pull out of it. The first is 100% we're better off than we were in 2013. If that happens again, we have higher levels of protection, people are more aware of the hazards, and I think overall we'll be better prepared to respond and recover from that. But I think the second one is there will be another one. Floods are a natural part of our environment. They will happen again and again and again. And so if, just because we've gone 10 years and we've done a lot of these projects doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. And there's a large portion of the province that, if that 2013 bullseye had moved up and hit the North Saskatchewan Basin, we'd be having a totally different presentation right now. And even in the last 2 years, they had significant flooding in northwestern Alberta last year. Fort McMurray got hit by the ice jam floods in 2020. So flooding is, again, part of Alberta's kind of fabric and just the reality of the environment we live in. So just having that diligence to, keep protecting all this new infrastructure is going to require maintenance. It's going to require people to operate it. So we just need to make sure we keep that in mind and factor that going forward. So that is where I will leave. It's sort of hopefully not a too sad a note, but I think it's just we don't want to be too naive because it will come again. I guess I'm happy for questions if there are.
Any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. There's one coming right here. Here we go.
So, Peter, that's a great talk. Thanks a lot. So when I was with the feds way back, we did an assessment of national floodplain mapping. I don't know if it's my voice that triggers this thing or what, but, I just wanted to point out to folks here that, we reviewed a lot of what was going on in Canada with respect to floodplain mapping. And in my personal opinion, Alberta had the best system together, right? Because everything was visible, you knew exactly what was done, right? And so I just wanted to point out that in my view, you guys did the best job in the country in terms of pulling together your floodplain map. So I just wanted to make that point.
I think we definitely have, it's been fun working with the federal government as well as other provinces and territories to share the lessons we've learned. Like 2013, we walked away with so much more knowledge now where we're at, and it's definitely something we're keen to give back to where we can. And we're, other groups are doing other things that are super cool too. So a lot of like the Fuse system is something that's rolling out across the country, and we've been able to work with Saskatchewan and, share code back and forth. It's kind of, the nitty-gritty technical details, but it's neat to see products like that come together where all the, agencies across Canada can work together on common systems and really find efficiencies and, scale up tools like that. So.
Hi. Yeah, I thought that was a very good presentation. I'm wondering if the floodplain mapping work that you've been advancing on is being taken up by municipalities and land use planning. Is there?
Yep, absolutely. So as part of the flood mapping program, we start working with municipalities right before the study even launches. So we make sure the extents of the flood mapping, like upstream and downstream, make sense for where they need. Ideally, we're getting ahead of where houses will be so that people are buying houses or building houses in spots where they understand the flood risk for. And then as we move through the study, we're regularly providing updates. They're reviewing the mapping that we're providing them to give feedback to make sure we have the best information possible. It's, we're pulling together what we can, but it's easy to miss, little tidbits of history that are important for calibrating hydraulic models and things like that. So we, absolutely working with them, and then on the implementation side, supporting them to build it into their land use plan. So that varies a little bit municipality to municipality, but definitely, in the Calgary area, like the flood mapping is an integral part of their land use planning. So.